My name is Susan Inman, and I'm going to be moderating the family panel today. And this year, we're going to be talking a lot about advocacy. And one of the things I've already noticed in today's amazing presentations is how many audience members have identified issues that you especially are really aware of and really knowledgeable about and want something to happen about. I'd like to suggest to you that you are the next step for that project. And we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. Hopefully, by hearing these four panelists in a few minutes, you'll have more ideas about what you can do with your advocacy efforts. I'd like to suggest to you that you already are doing key steps in the formation of advocacy. One of the key things that we all need to do if we want to be an effective advocate for improving mental health services for our family member and in general is to do our homework. We need to really understand these illnesses, and they're complicated, and there's so much information coming out all the time. And what we got today through Randall White and through Diane Fredrickson was a chance to just hear people who are in the trenches, in the front lines, responding to the most complicated illnesses that many of our family members are dealing with. So really useful, and also through the Odin Books display, lots of opportunities to learn more. And Vancouver's lucky because there's 3 different family education programs that go on. And they, as Justin was saying to people, they are all free of charge. So lots of places to do our homework about the illnesses. And we also can learn in some of these programs about the system itself. Although I've never heard such a fabulous, comprehensive introduction to a new service as we got to have today from Monica McAlduff and George Scotton. This is amazing. I think we all really understand the Access and Assessment Center in a whole new and important way. You're also getting a chance, especially in this last program with Heidi and with Justin and with Sally Hull, to learn about community resources. One of the things that can happen to us when mental illness strikes our families, especially if we thought it would never happen in our families, is that we are really isolated, besides for some of us not knowing anything or knowing things that really were not very useful. We really can be just kind of trapped in the illness in some way that's not exactly like our family member, but still trapped. And making contact with other people that you see all around you here and in these support groups that were mentioned can make so much difference. And also, I have learned so many practical tips because, as even George Scotton was saying, the system is so complicated, I'm still trying to figure out how it works. Well, you know, find another mom or dad who's been on it figuring out all kinds of stuff, and they can give you great advice. So networking is another important way to prepare ourselves to be advocates because we can become more knowledgeable about resources that other family members, other families also need. You're also learning how to do more, and you have some opportunities to do some advocacy stuff today because part of this conference every year is in your folder. If you opened your purple folder, you would see that there's something called the Conference Evaluation Form. And all conferences I ever go to have them, and what I hear from conference organizers is usually people don't get a really big high return rate because people are tired at the end of a conference. For some reason, this conference, families have been super responsible and have gotten the evaluation forms in. And this can really matter as people try to say this is a service people want to have happen on an ongoing basis. If you turn it over, you will see 3 simple survey questions. And we heard in one of the presentations that the system does want to have family involvement about the kinds of services that we want, service planning. This is a way that you can have some input about what services did you not have enough of, do you want more of, or have never come to Vancouver Coastal Health Authority or whatever health authority you are in. This is where you get to let the system know what other needs you have. So I suggest at the end of this that you take some time to fill this out, because people really do collate this information and look at it. As well, there is a donation table at the Family Advisory Committee table where you can give money to help the conference keep happening. All of the speakers always donate their time. We're really lucky that we're in Vancouver with so many people who do this, but there's a lot of other expenses, so donations are really welcome. You might decide as well, having heard so much about a family advisory committee, that you want to apply to join. There is an application form in your folder as well, and you'll probably hear more about this from our first speaker, Linda Parrott. There's a family advisory committee in North Vancouver. There's a family advisory committee in Richmond, and if you're in an area that doesn't have one, I think the system is ripe for your advocacy to suggest that the system there needs some kind of home base like this to get the family voice more securely implemented into the infrastructure of the local mental health system. One piece of advice I give to people, and I try to give to myself, is that when we have an advocacy concern, we just look for every opportunity to push it. So I'm going to take the next 2 minutes and push my current advocacy issue. You got to hear Diane Fredrickson talk about common cognitive losses in psychiatric illnesses, especially with schizophrenia. Would you raise your hand if this was the first time that you actually had these cognitive losses pointed out to you? So the rest of you had heard about them sometime. Okay, it took me years to start to hear about them, and years to find out that, in fact, the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health, the largest government-funded research organization about severe mental illnesses in the world, has been researching these common cognitive losses that especially accompany schizophrenia: difficulty with short-term memory, working memory, sequencing, problem-solving, judgment, something called visual vigilance, and social skills. These are incredibly well-researched because of NIMH in the last 15, 20 years. Tons of research. What NIMH has also done is to pour money into researching cognitive remediation programs. Canada is behind in the implementation of research-based cognitive remediation programs. We don't have enough happening. So we, first of all, need to commend the Early Psychosis Intervention Program that Diane's a part of, because if you go online and get to the BC Psychosis Toolkit, you'll see those cognitive losses identified, and you'll see common adaptation strategies that people can use who are coping with these losses: checklists, alarms. But cognitive remediation as a field has moved far beyond that, and actually is identifying particular ways to go about, because of neuroplasticity, helping people relearn how to think in certain ways that can make daily life much easier. And I'm actually happy to tell you that about 2 weeks ago, this book by Oxford University Press came out, Cognitive Remediation to Improve Functional Outcomes. edited by Alice Medalia, sort of the prime mover in the field at Columbia University, and Christopher Bowie from Queen's University. So to have a Canadian spearheading this is wonderful. I can tell you that, as of 2 days ago, in talking to Christopher Bowie, there's still only 3 small programs in Ontario where he's based, and he doesn't know of any others that are looking at comprehensive cognitive remediation programs. I just retired from 25 years of teaching and decided to see if there's any way I could do anything to move this forward. And I was really lucky that the BC Schizophrenia Society exists. Somebody who's been part of it for years, Dr. John Gray, agreed to partner me, and the BC Schizophrenia Society agreed to offer us assistance in developing the Promoting Cognitive Remediation project that has many different components, which I won't go into here, but actually, if you do come next month to the North Shore Schizophrenia Society's presentation at Lionsgate Hospital, you'll hear more about that project. So what I would like to do now is to move on to hearing from the amazing 4 people who are going to speak to you today. In your program, you will see their introductions, so I won't go through those. I'm just going to introduce them and let them each speak. And after we have heard from each person, we'll take time and we'll have plenty of time for questions that you might have. Our first speaker is Linda Parrott. Testing.
Thank you. Okay. I've been advocating for my youngest son since he became ill with schizophrenia about 12 years ago. My journey in advocacy began because of other people's advocacy, and that provided me with opportunities to educate myself, and I would say most importantly, give hope, and that's been there throughout this whole journey. It's so important. Learning about mental illness and advocating for my son led to my involvement with the North Shore Family Advisory Committee, whose purpose is to represent the needs of family with mental illness and addictions. I have learned much over these past years in how to advocate for my son. I was privileged a few years ago to attend a thesis defense in which a mother of a son with serious mental illness was asked by a committee member, a psychiatrist, how can we best support your loved one? Her response was key. By listening to and validating our experience, no one loves and understands him as we do. This perspective has been central to our family's advocacy for our son. Recovery looks different for each person, and family's input is crucial for the recovery process, and we've heard that today a lot. Initiating contact with the core people in my son's mental health team has been integral to his ongoing recovery. Regular communication with his case manager and psychiatrist has helped them adapt care to suit his individual and changing needs, and on more than one occasion has prevented a relapse. I have learned much from these professionals, and over time have been able to share my understanding with other families, as well as helping my son. The level of my involvement has fluctuated depending on the severity of my son's symptoms and has evolved over the years. When stable, my son usually meets independently with his psychiatrist, and I may touch base as needed by attending the last 5 minutes of his appointment. When I asked my son how he views the relationship between him, our family, and his psychiatrist, he said, and I quote, "Communication has allowed us to be unified in how we approach the illness in order to be as effective as we can. We have been very fortunate in the level of support we have received. I believe working collaboratively is key." I've also learned how important accurate record keeping is in advocating for better care for my son. A record of medication levels and changes over the years has enabled us to report side effects and, most importantly, errors in dosage and brands. And he's very sensitive to medication changes, and in many cases, we've managed to prevent relapses as a result of that. We have also written letters to support our son in different circumstances. His history, which I had recorded in a journal and was able to go back to support him, was exceptionally important in our letters to the review panel at Lionsgate Hospital when our son appealed his certification. In our letters that were presented to the panel, we described his history and the strong likelihood, if he was decertified, that he would go missing as he had done in the past. The review panels are given no background information, so our letters are crucial. Thankfully, the decision was made to keep him certified and safe. Our family has learned to persevere in our advocacy. My son's transition to housing and a new team was a major change in his life, and we all wanted it to go well. The first home he was taken to was a difficult experience for him personally. He has space issues, and to him the house was dark and close and caused distress. I understood, and we worked hard to help this new team understand our son. As a result of our efforts, he was able to go to a more suitable home. I was also, at a later date, part of a presentation to North Shore housing staff, and with other families spoke about our group home experiences and the importance of communication with families. I've been a part, I guess Vancouver's had their family advisory committee. North Van started later, in about 2008. We had help establishing our committee and good examples with the Vancouver committee. It's been a really good experience for me, and I learn more, and I'm also able to use my experience to help others. The FAC provides the family perspective for acute and community programs being delivered out of the New Hope Centre in North Vancouver. We don't advocate for individual families, but work in a positive and a collaborative way on the behalf of families. I've just listed some of the things that we've accomplished recently, and we have a table out there with members from our Family Advisory Committee. Members developed 2 brochures that were made available for all areas of the Hope Centre, as well as to family physicians and psychiatrists. One brochure is what families need to know during a psychiatric emergency, and the other is a family information pamphlet for the inpatient unit, and it's given to families during intake. At our FAC meeting this last week, we found out there's an increased demand for these brochures, and they're going out into other places on the North Shore. 3 years ago, we have part of what we do. It's very collaborative in North Vancouver, and the Family Advisory Committee works with people in the Hope Centre, and we work towards the same goals. And 2 of us meet with Dr. Bergman, who's the head of inpatient care, and Ira Ronas, manager of adult services, about every 3 months to exchange information. And we had asked 3 years ago, like, what can we do to help? And Dr. Bergman suggested that we have a regular support and information meeting for families that have a family member on the unit. We started that in January 2013. We hold meetings every second Thursday, and there's a social worker as well as a family member. I take part in this. I really enjoy it. I find that I get surprised sometimes at how helpful my experience can be for other people. So there's like silver linings here. The feedback we've got from families is exceptional. So we were talking about knowing about a family meeting. Well, things like that are raised and help families, particularly families where it's the first time that they have someone on the unit. We've been developing a website for families and for those with lived experience to access services and resources. This is coming along really well, and I think it should be up pretty soon. And again, that's collaborative with Ira Ronas, the manager of adult services, and members of our committee. We have representatives on a number of Hope Center and community committees to offer a family perspective to these groups. It's wonderful because we are included and our opinions are valuable, so we're on many, many committees in North Vancouver. For example, the Kelty Mental Health Resource Center, the Blends Hope Cafe, that is a social enterprise which offers employment opportunities for people in recovery from mental health issues. We work closely with our North Vancouver RCMP liaison officer, and he started 1 year ago, who is also a community associate member of our committee. A second constable will begin in June, and they are forming a steering committee for police mental health program, and that'll include family and people with lived experience. They have so far it's moving along. It's very exciting because we're really working closely, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and support to have this kind of communication with families and with the police. One of our members of our FAC with lived experience has facilitated a mental health family educational workshop series that focuses on practical skills for mental health family supporters. The topics stigma, boundaries, and communication. This young man has done a fantastic job of this, and Dr. Apu Chakraborty, who's head of community mental health services in North Van, has breakfast talks every second Friday, and this young man will be speaking so it's more available to other people, and families have learned so much from that. To end, I really had to think a lot about advocacy and what advocacy was for me. I believe that advocacy in its many forms educates and informs. Daily interactions that enlighten others help to break down stigma and hopefully over time change societal views on mental illness. My oldest son touched my heart when he responded to a Globe and Mail headline that stereotyped schizophrenia. This was last January. He very succinctly described the illness and its impact and ended with his letter with this statement: "A general lack of public awareness about severe mental illness is a major barrier to the recovery and reintegration of our most valuable members. I expect the Globe and Mail to do better than this." And he signed subscriber, teacher, brother.
You're going to now get a chance to hear from Erin Hawks Emeru.
Thank you. Every time I see my psychiatrist, I shut down. I know he cares, but he asks the questions he must, and I soon feel like a disjointed collection of symptoms for him to pick out and medicate. 10 minutes later, a half hour late, I emerge to find myself talking out loud to myself in an effort to regain a connectivity between the person I know I am and the person he provokes. This is very common for me to shut down in the presence of a psychiatrist. Ironically, when I shut down, they sometimes interpret that as my mental illness. And I do. I have paranoid schizophrenia. And it's true, when I'm ill, I repeatedly shut down altogether. I end up on the psych ward, and neither nurse nor psychiatrist, not family or friends, can really engage me. I'm lost in my world of voices, paranoia, and delusions. I'm terrified. I think there's microscopic rats in my brain eating my brain. And I think that a tracker had put a tracking device in my abdomen and was going to shoot me down with a sniper gun. In the hospital, the only way to get rid of the rats is to bleed them out. And so on my many certifications, I sit against the concrete wall and bang my head repeatedly, trying to bleed the rats out. Code white, code white. Security officers come running. Once again, I'm restrained, and I'm given injections of sedatives and antipsychotics. Why should I trust a system that does this to me? Not once, not thrice. I lost track after a dozen or so episodes over my 11 involuntary treatment under the Mental Health Act. Some medications helped, some didn't, and I am usually there, be it PAU, VGH, UBC, St. Paul's, Riverview, or the Nova Scotia Hospital back in Halifax, for at least a month at a time. In there I'm labeled chronic, severe, and refractory. One psychiatrist went so far as to tell me I would never be a productive member of society. I wish I could remember which one said that to me, but it's all a blur. Throughout these tumultuous years of shutting down, I was unable to advocate for myself. My parents, who lived on the East Coast while I was here on the West, offered support in phone calls and offers to come visit me, but I refused. I just couldn't let anyone in. How heart-wrenching it must have been for them, with me with flat affect, +++ in the notes, and loss of spontaneous speech. I answered their questions with monosyllabic responses, if that. I was too overwhelmed to let anyone in. And in doing so, I lost their valuable advocacy. I refused to let them talk to my psychiatrist, thinking that intervention was conspiracy. When the contact was made without my consent, I felt violated and powerless. But where did my rights to privacy and parental advocacy begin? Shut down, I cannot advocate my rights. Should more involuntary intrusion on my life be made without my input? After, when appropriate doses of antipsychotics coursed from their pills to my brain, I awaken from my shut-down schizophrenic state. The hospitalization continues, but now I can see and jump through the hoops my psychiatrist holds out for me along the road to decertification. I begin to advocate for myself, for my ride up the privilege ladder. The analogy I like to use is this. Imagine you're in a swimming pool and you can't touch the bottom and you can't swim. You're flailing, thrashing, just struggling for a breath, and all you can focus on is the immediate survival instinct. But then imagine a table being put in that swimming pool. You can stand, your head's above water. Crisis is over. For me, that table is medication. Without it, I'm drowning in my schizophrenia, but with it, I can stand up, stand tall, and not only can I breathe now, but I can also talk, I can sing, I can ask for help. I can engage with my therapist or my psychiatrist maybe even. I can self-care and seek interactions that provoke a greater quality of life for me. I'm therefore an advocate for the use of involuntary treatment. Even though I abhorred it in the moment, I don't think I deserved days in the cells they call the quiet rooms. I didn't deserve to be tied down to a stretcher, unable to move. I didn't deserve involuntary injections of sedatives and antipsychotics. As much as I didn't like them in the moment, and it's hard for me to recall them now, I know that it saved my life on several occasions. I now work as a peer support worker with one of the ACT teams that we've heard about, ACT 2. My clients often open up to me and not the psychiatrist first. I hear, don't tell Dr. So-and-so, but I haven't told anyone, but, or I can't tell the team, but. The hardest part of my job is that line between tattletale and secret keeper. I talk to my clients weekly. I talk to their psychiatrists, and I often hear two very different stories. I therefore am able to be a strong advocate for those clients. For one, I pushed the doctor to further medicate one of my clients' depression. He admitted to me on several occasions that he is excellent at putting on a happy face, and it took a lot of advocacy on my part for them to know that he wasn't the happiness he presented. On the other hand, I've advocated for a reduction in medication for one of my clients. He was over-sedated, sleeping 18 hours a day, and had no quality of life. He was rapidly moving towards depression. I try to tell the team, we don't have to medicate every little part. Sometimes, and I speak from experience, it's better to live with some symptoms, not overwhelming ones, not the crises, but some symptoms they're worth living with in order to have a quality of life. Finally, a time when people who knew me somewhat advocated on my behalf. I had fled my apartment because I knew the police were going to come pick me up because my case manager had just told me I was about to be certified again. I wasn't well, and I'm going to read one page from my book that illustrates it. This is When Quietness Came, a neuroscientist's personal journey with schizophrenia. It was published 4 years ago, and I'll read it from it. The plan I devised amid my delusions involved reviewing the pages of the neuroscience faculty at UBC and choosing 6 whose research interests involved neuroregeneration, the repair of damaged neurons, or neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons. Excited, I drafted an email. Dear researcher, I am a PhD student in the neuroscience program and have a research proposal for you. By way of background, my brain is being eaten by microscopic rats that live inside my skull. The issue that should interest you is that after this consumption, my brain regenerates. I realize that this is a unique ability and assume that researchers such as yourself would be intrigued by this. This, along with other pertinent questions, will be answered by rigorous research. I therefore hope that you will take the time and consider this project. In order to ensure that the rats consumed enough brain for there to be substantial regeneration and neurogenesis afterwards, I've decreased the amount of medication I am taking, as the medication causes the rats to go into hibernation. Within a few weeks, there should be peak neurogenesis and neuroregeneration. Finally, I assume that you will want both in vivo and post-mortem analyses. If you are interested, please let me know when you can scan my brain, and afterwards, I will find out the best way to kill myself so that I can donate my brain for further study. Timing will be important. I realize that this is a considerable sacrifice on my part, but the deep meaning has chosen me, and I cannot ignore that allowing the study of my brain may reveal ways of initiating regeneration and functional recovery in patients with central nervous system damage in which repair is presently impossible. The personal cost is therefore of little importance in this light. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to hear from you soon. So, I heard back from one researcher. She had served on my master's committee and remembered me. So she, via email, invited me to her office to speak to me. Remember, at this point, I was not going back to my home. I had been not home for 4 days at this point and classified as a missing person by my supervisor. They had talked together, and it was arranged for her to email me. So I went to her office thinking that we would discuss this amazing research proposal I had. But instead, she starts talking about the meaning of life and about the blessing of my own life. I didn't understand why. And while I listened to her, I waited to talk about the experiment. I noticed 2 students who were hovering around her doorway. I thought they were rather rude to be waiting while I was talking to her. Then they came in, VPD, plainclothes, and a mental health nurse. I was handcuffed, brought to hospital again. Later, I went and thanked her. She is among the many people I now recognize as caring enough to advocate for that blessing that is my own life. I may have schizophrenia, but I am definitely not a member of society that doesn't contribute. Thank you.
Both Erin Hawks Emeru and Sandra Ewan McKay, who is sitting here, are unusual in Canada because they have memoirs out about their experiences. When Quietness Came is Sandra's memoir. When Quietness Came is Erin's memoir, and My Schizophrenic Life is Sandra Ewan McKay's memoir. These are really valuable tools to let us understand what the illness feels like. Thank you, Erin. And we're going to hear now from Jane Duval.
Thank you, Erin. I just have to, every time I hear your story, I remember buying your book, taking it home. I think I might have bought it here. I'm not 100% sure. Took it home, got up in the morning, opened it about 9 o'clock in the morning, finished it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I just sat and read and read and read. If you have not read this book, please get it and read it. And I think having Erin here today, and Erin as an advocate, really speaks to the importance of partnership in advocacy for people with mental illness and families. Because the partnership that's so important has to include people who actually have lived experience with mental illness, family members who love those people and want to help, and caring professionals. Without that triumvirate of people, it's like a three-legged milking stool. If there's a leg missing, it's going to fall over. It's not going to work. You really need three strong voices. Because let's face it, folks, the system is a mess. I know I'm always so heartened to come to the family conference because I always learn so many new and interesting things. And particularly today, all of the new resources that are available for families and for people with mental illness, I mean, it's really, things have improved so much in the last 20 years, and it's unbelievable. However, the truth is that if you look at the typical family trying to cope with a serious mental illness, that family is still, as Dr. Fredrickson said, in chaos. If you're trying to cope, you don't have, and particularly if you don't have any information, which very few people do in the beginning, unless you happen to come from, and this is somebody said to me, fortunately my mother had schizophrenia, so I knew what to do when my son got sick. Well, now, that's not really a fortunate situation, but this person was describing the fact that they didn't sit around and wait and look through the yellow pages or on the internet or whatever. They actually knew some of the pathways to care. So this is so very important to actually have the tools, and as Susan said, do our homework. Because unfortunately, you really do have to do your homework. There's still a sad, sad lack of resources. I mean, there are good resources, there are not nearly enough of them. There are wonderful tools out there, wonderful tools. Again, you have to dig, you have to follow, you have to pull threads, you need to talk to, specifically, if you're a family member, talk to other family members. If you're a person with mental illness, talk to another person with mental illness who is actually, if you see that person's doing well, ask them, who's your doctor? How do you like them? That sort of thing. The most important tools, I think, I worked for the Schizophrenia Society for 20 years before I retired last year. And I think the most important tools are, first of all, before anything else, and Sally mentioned this and somebody else mentioned writing things down, record keeping. writing things down is something it took me. I have a son with schizophrenia. He's now in his mid-50s. It took me years to learn to write things down. Years. People told me, keep records. I thought, this is so incredibly amazing, I will never forget it. But of course I did. I kept forgetting. And so when I went to actually try and get some help for my son, I did not have real facts. I had a bunch of jumbled recollections and horror stories and a whole, I don't know, I didn't have a system. So the record keeping is incredibly important. So that's like numero uno. I would say, speaking to families, if you can do this, if you get this piece down and start, and you may even have to, I had to excuse myself in the beginning when I went to a meeting with mental health professionals. I would take out my little book and start writing things down, and I'd say, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have to write things down because I don't have a very good memory. But in fact, what happened when I started to do that is people stopped fobbing me off with meaningless replies, just trying to move me out of the office. They actually told me things that meant something. And of course, I did have much better information that I could act on. The other couple of tools, Susan has asked me to speak about the Mental Health Act. The BC Mental Health Act, Sally mentioned it today. British Columbia is very fortunate in having one of the best mental health acts in Canada. And it is a wonderful tool. It's a great tool. If you're not familiar with it, I would suggest you just make a little note to look it up. You can look it up on the government website. You can look it up on the BC Schizophrenia Society website. They have a one-page fact sheet on it. It's really very good because what it says is that the act was written to protect our most vulnerable citizens. In other words, it's for the protection of people who cannot protect themselves. And it is also, in British Columbia, there are two particular aspects to the Mental Health Act that are terrific. One is that it says you are to be hospitalized for treatment. In other words, you're not just put in the hospital and locked up and not given any treatment. That is not allowed in British Columbia. That does happen in some provinces in Canada, where you can be put into isolation and not treated because of different kinds of legal problems. But British Columbia, the act is very clear, you are hospitalized for treatment. The second thing that often I heard, actually, from my son's doctors from time to time, I'm sorry, we cannot certify your son, he's not dangerous. If any of you have heard the dangerousness criteria, either a danger to self or others or anything like that, as a reason why your loved one cannot be put in the hospital, the doctor will refuse to certify. That's just plain wrong. Let me tell you, it's wrong. The Mental Health Act in British Columbia is extremely clear. That is about the person's health and well-being. The idea of having somebody committed to hospital is in fact so they can get treated and get better and be restored to their home and their community. That is the whole purpose of the Act in British Columbia. So it's a very important piece of legislation. Unfortunately, there are still some people in the mental health professionals. There's a bit of they call it in the mental health biz a knowledge gap, which means some mental health professionals, I don't know where they learn about the Mental Health Act, but it seems to be from watching television sometimes, because if you watch Law and Order and things like that, you'll hear, sorry, we can't do anything, the person's not dangerous. That's completely wrong. It's just totally wrong. In British Columbia, it has more to do, when if you look at the actual criteria, they talk about deterioration of health, they talk about all kinds of, even about the person's economic well-being, family well-being, there's all kinds of criteria, but certainly dangerous is not up at the top of the list. So the Mental Health Act is extremely important. I actually have, the BC Schizophrenia Society takes a special interest in the Act and protecting the Act, has put their money where their mouth is, going to court 2 or 3 times, getting official standing at inquests, and when the Mental Health Act was being challenged. And I have actually testified at those in some of those cases in court, and talked about my personal situation and I had to describe the unfortunate situation where my son was so ill that I did have to call the police to get help. And he did have to be taken away in restraints, and it was horrible. It was horrible for him, it was horrible for me, but you know what? He would not be alive today. I don't believe he'd be alive if that was not available to us as an option, because he was 2 days later, when I would visit, he would say, "Mom, I'm so sorry, and I really feel so bad." But it's just the way he was so ill. There was no choice at that point. The system actually worked. The Mental Health Act was interpreted correctly. He was taken to the hospital. He was treated for his illness. So the Mental Health Act, I know it sounds, when we talk about legislation, everybody's eyes kind of roll backwards, think, "Oh God, this is so boring." But the Mental Health Act is not boring. It's worth looking at, and it's worth looking at the User's Guide. There's a guide to the Mental Health Act online, which is really quite interesting. There's a whole section for families, which is quite helpful. So that's one thing. That's one piece of legislation I would certainly think is a great tool for families, and once I found out what it actually said, I was able to use it appropriately. The other thing is the business of confidentiality. I heard that come up again today, again and again. There's another piece of legislation in British Columbia called the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act, which again is misinterpreted constantly, where family members are told, "I'm sorry, we can't speak to you," because it would be breaking confidentiality. This is completely incorrect. There is a bulletin that pertains to the Freedom of Information. It's called the FIPPA. It's called the FIPPA Bulletin, FIPPA. And that bulletin actually says that, this is very interesting because, again, when I found this out, a whole bunch of possibilities were open to us as family members that weren't there before. It actually says public bodies, that would be mental health teams, hospitals, police, etc., may release necessary personal information to third parties, including family members, without the consent of the client, where disclosure is required for continuity of care or for compelling reasons if someone's health or safety is at risk. That is the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. That is the correct interpretation. I noticed there were some school counselors, a school counselor spoke today, or a teacher. They have the same issues. They are often shut out from being part of the team. You are part of a public body. You have the right, when you're trying to help a young person that you're concerned about their health and well-being, you have the right to information and to give information, to get information and to give information. Now, this does not apply to private physicians. They are exempt from this, but public bodies. So most mental health care is actually being delivered in a public health care system. If it's a private physician, that would be a different matter. So those are the two legislative tools I would say. Really, it's worth doing your homework on those two things. And again, the BC Schizophrenia Society has fact sheets on this that they're very simple and very self-explanatory. So I really encourage you to look them up. The last thing, I ride the hobby horse of cognition and schizophrenia. And Erin, I think, is probably the exception. I think 94% of people with schizophrenia have pretty serious cognitive deficits that do stop them from, it doesn't mean they're not intelligent. It does not mean that they can't sometimes speak 4 languages or play the violin or do amazing things, but often their cognitive deficits are such that they are prevented from organizing the tasks of daily existence. So my son, for example, has a very, very difficult time with organizing his daily life in terms of just making simple decisions. His executive functioning is so is such that he cannot hold, say, for example, 4 things at once in his mind, organize them, prioritize them, and make a decision. So that is a very, very difficult thing for him, and it's because of his illness. And once he found that out, his whole life got a lot easier, and so did our life as a family. We just things got better, because then we could find some tools to help overcome these. So that's why Susan is so keen on cognitive remediation, and I think that's why we're all keen on this. And again, there's a big knowledge gap within the mental health profession about cognitive deficits and schizophrenia. There's simple, easy tests that can be done to measure cognitive deficits so that people can actually know it's not their fault, they're not stupid, they're not unmotivated, they're not, idiots. It's a feature of a core feature of their illness, and then once you've got that, you can actually start to find some tools to help the person. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening to me ramble. When Susan said you can talk about legislation, I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be so boring. But I do hope some of these things would be helpful to you. And by all means, don't hesitate to contact the Schizophrenia Society about any of these things, because they do have the information, and it's really in a form that it's digestible. Thanks.
I just want to point out how fortunate we are in British Columbia that we had people like Jane and others from the BC Schizophrenia Society who worked actively to ensure that we ended up with a good mental health act that gives us the foundation we need, and people from the North Shore Schizophrenia Society, which is here today. We need these organizations because we can't do it by ourselves. Would you please now give your attention to our last parent, Marilyn Baker.
Thank you, Susan. I guess I'm batting cleanup here. I think a lot of very good information has already been shared by everyone, so I'll just add a few little extra bits here and there. When Susan first asked me to do this, I thought, I don't even know what advocacy means. I couldn't even say it. But then she reminded me that much of what I have been doing for the last 20 years in writing has been about advocating for my loved one, my son. So for me, advocacy really resides on two levels. The first level is very specific, and it's doing whatever it takes to get your loved one's life back on the rails and running as smoothly as possible, and keeping it that way. The second level is really more general, and it involves raising awareness so that you can approach the people in power and urge them to do whatever it takes to enrich lives and enhance their care. I haven't really done too much on the enriching and enhancement part, because most of my stuff has been done on the detailed, specific parts of advocating for my son. A lot of it in reaction to a crisis. And I'm sure everyone here has many stories that they can tell that they have already done about this. I guess my most successful piece of work has been in obtaining for him a CPP disability pension. It took 4 years from the start when I first realized that it existed and obtained the forms that had to be filled out so that the various people could sign them and send them off to Ottawa. It wasn't bureaucratic sluggishness that made it take so long. He had a very wonderful general practitioner, his family doctor, who agreed with me that he definitely met the criteria for a disability pension, but he just couldn't bring himself to work with me because he was citing patient confidentiality and privacy laws, what Jane has just mentioned. Similarly, his psychiatrist at UBC wasn't able to tell me very much and fill out the forms, at least I thought. My son has a habit of vanishing and disappearing overnight and popping up somewhere else. And he basically abandoned us and left a big pile of black garbage bags in his room. And I was going through them, and I found all the forms. And they were all filled out, at least the doctor part was. I was able to, so that was the first time I even learned of a diagnosis. I was able to fill out the rest of them and fire them off to Ottawa. And then nothing happened for about, I don't know, 2 years. I kept, writing and bugging, but I never heard anything back. And then when he vanished once more from where he was living in Ottawa, where his sister is, as it turns out, she went through all his stuff and found millions of unopened letters from CPP asking him for his birth certificate, which of course nobody had because I didn't know where it was. So I wrote away to get a duplicate copy of a birth certificate, fired it off to Ottawa, and bingo, paycheck arrives. So I felt finally that I had, gotten something done for him. So that's what I mean by very detailed and very specific things I was doing. Another thing that I did was obtain an MSP card because he had no medical coverage. He didn't live here. He didn't live in Ontario. He was just nowhere. So I got an MSP, and then I found out that in order for him to get medications at a reduced cost, he needed to take advantage of the BC's Fair Pharmacare system, which I think is the best in Canada because it's income-based. And so I dug back through the files and filed 3 years' worth of his income tax to the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, and managed to get 3 notices of assessment, and then went to MSP and managed to get premium assistance, which also, by the way, helps with ambulance bills. My son has a very interesting habit of phoning ambulances every so often when he knows he's in trouble. At least he recognizes sometimes when he's ill. And so we were able to get some of that covered, which was very useful. I think it's wonderful if you can get power of attorney or a representation agreement. I strongly advise it if you can. I have not been very successful in persuading him to do that. I have a very limited power of attorney, which has helped me a great deal on other times when he's vanished, because he uses his debit card quite frequently, and I was able to go into the bank and talk to the manager, and they could track his whereabouts, and I learned where he was, what city he was in, which hotel he was staying in, and even what he was eating, because he used debit for everything. So it was a comfort to me to know that he was still alive. Susan asked me to mention some of the things I use my writing as a freelance writer for, mainly writing letters. I write letters to doctors and nurses and social workers and police, and thank them, just basically thank them for everything they've done for our family. It's been fantastic. They have been wonderful. And I also like to be able to give feedback on how the meds are working when he shares with me what meds he's taking. Another thing I would do as an advocate is provide a permanent mailing address for important things like banking and income tax information. And basically just handling crises, which happens fairly frequently, but lately it's been pretty good, so he's pretty stable at the moment. On the enhancement and enrichment level, just a couple of things that you can do to raise awareness. I think awareness is really important, and then Jane pointed out that people really don't understand the Mental Health Act, and they don't understand the Privacy Act, and lots of things. So I write letters to editors, I write letters to my MLA, I write letters to the Minister of Health, Terry Lake. I write articles and try and get them published, not with much success lately, but nevertheless, I blog. Until they cut me off, I was participating in the Mental Health Commission of Canada's Collaborative Spaces area on their website, along with many other people who just would share things and try and bring awareness to light. However, they have changed that all over now, and it's not available for people to write about. So I'm going to investigate their Facebook and their Twitter accounts. So, but if Susan or someone else from the Schizophrenia Society sends me emails and it's about an important article, basically I tweet. I Twitter, may not pass that back to you, but I do. And I also am on I've managed to get on some lists of very, very interesting scientific papers along the lines of what Erin and I were talking about at lunch. And the breakthroughs that are happening are tremendous, and I like to be able to pass that on to my list of followers and Facebook and so on, so that people are made more aware of it. So just in closing, I would just say as an advocate, if you're going to be writing, just sit down and do it while you're in the mood, write from the heart. They will feel your pain. Use technology. Twitter and Facebook are fantastic. Emails make it really easy to get at your MLA and any other people in power. And never give up. Be tenacious, and they will change their minds and listen to you eventually. Thank you.
There's one more way that Marilyn didn't mention that is really important about how she uses her writing skills. Increasingly, we do have articles that relate to mental health, mental illness policy in a variety of different platforms. And often there's a space where the public can comment. And often the comments are from people who really don't represent the best interests of our family members. And our family members may not be up to interested in commenting themselves. If we want their interests represented in these settings when other kinds of narratives are being developed about best policies, we need to keep writing in. And Marilyn is somebody that provides really thoughtful commentary on articles in the popular press. So really valuable. But we'll turn over now to Janet has a microphone here, and Gail Windsor has one there. So just raise your hand if you have a question for anyone.
Thank you. Question for Marilyn. You mentioned representation agreements and powers of attorney, and I've been trying to get information on these for quite some time now, and I'm still really quite confused and wondered if any of you have any advice on how to get information and where to go to draw these documents up.
These are really useful documents, and actually for several years we have had a local lawyer, Hugh McClellan, give workshops here about these documents. These documents are really useful. You can get information from the BC Schizophrenia Society, I believe, about all of these, and Nancy Ford is here from the North Shore Schizophrenia Society. You guys also have information about these documents. They are extremely useful.
Nancy just said that they also have workshops, correct?
I have a question for everybody. I'm a person with lived experience, and I'm going to have to outline a couple of assumptions before I start. But basically, if you are in hospital or you're a family member, you want to get to know as a family member what people need to get effective care, but as a patient, you're probably not doing so well, and to be honest, if you don't trust your surroundings, you're probably going to lie. So what are the things that you can tell people right now that helped or hindered your ability to disclose, or like what helped your family members open up?
Is it you're wondering what we could tell the doctors and the nurses about our family member? Yeah, yeah. Oh. In our family's case, the one word that was used by every single doctor and nurse that ever treated my loved one was, he's very guarded, he won't open up. It is very, very difficult. Even now, and with his social worker, it's very difficult. And they do tell fibs. If they tell people what they think they want them to hear. So I think it's very specific. I would think in my son's case, it was just finding an empathetic case manager who drew him out, talked about his cat, and he finally was very friendly with her.
In my daughter's case, fortunately, she hasn't had to be hospitalized very often, but certainly when she was in the hospital, that wasn't going to be a time when she was going to be opening up and discussing a whole lot of things. We just wanted to help her be stabilized. But one of the issues that came up earlier today about confidentiality still has maybe a piece that we want to know a little bit more about, discuss a little bit more about, which is, what about when we supply information? And we, first of all, do have a representation agreement, and if you have this, they're really useful to just give to any hospital or health person, because it enables you legally to be involved. That's your entree to be involved. But still, when you're involved, things can go wrong, because when we supply information, we expect it to be confidential. I think there needs to be more training of staff about the importance of keeping information from families confidential, especially at that point in time, because often many of us have great relationships with our family member when they're well, but not when they're ill. So it's really important, if we're supplying key information to a psychiatrist, for instance, in a hospital, and they then, in a moment of frustration, say, well, your mom said, something that is really not very helpful in the big picture, but I think made the psychiatrist feel like he wasn't the only one thinking this particular thought. So we have to get that notion out there that at these especially delicate times, we need the mental health professionals to treat our input confidentially, so that our relationship is not undermined at this point.
I just wanted to respond to your question. Certainly for my son, who is 37 and was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, I think the best tool that I had to get to a point where we were able to talk about the illness was to continuously refer to it as an illness, to help him understand that it wasn't about behavior, it wasn't about psychology, it was an illness. And we used the wheelchair, trying to play basketball in a wheelchair without lowering the hoop. That was sort of I kept going back to that analogy. And I think that was absolutely critical to get to a place where he was actually able to talk about his illness. And probably the most recent pivotal moment for me was he was describing an episode that he was experiencing, and when I was talking to him about it and referring to it as anxiety, he said, "No, Mom, it was schizophrenia." That was absolutely profound, but it was years of focusing on, this is an illness. You're not doing anything wrong. This is an illness. So I'd like to share that with you. And the other thing about the representation agreement, it was also my most valuable tool. The bank has a copy of our representation agreement. My son went in one day to the bank, went to take some money out. There wasn't any money, and he said, "Well, what's the point of having a bank account? Close my bank account. If there's no money, just close it." And he marches out. I phoned the bank when I learned that this had taken place, and was able to make sure that that they kept the bank account open, because his disability check was coming in the next week into that very bank account. The representation agreement, the other resource along with BCSS is NIDUS. NIDUS, N-I-D-U-S, is an online resource for the representation agreement. If you go there, you can get the same information. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank everyone on the panel, and I just also want to, as a person who's lived with mental illness for over 35 years, who did not and does not have family support, I just want to commend everyone here that is a family member, parent or otherwise, that is supporting their loved one that's living with mental illness. It's actually really healing to me to see that, and I just also really personally want to thank Erin for your courage and your strength, and for sharing your story.
I'm a little confused about the difference between what Jane shared about the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act. I've heard before that part you quoted about the doctor sharing information with someone if it's to continue care for that person, if you're part of support for that person. But then, Susan, you saying a representation agreement is really important. So what, do you need the representation agreement, or not? I mean, the bank is another example of when you would need it, I guess. I'm now the bank for my sister, because apparently money gets stolen out of her account all the time. But in regards to the doctors, do you really need that representation agreement then, or not?
I think that this is confusing. Just a couple of things. A representation agreement can give you the right, when necessary, to act on the person's behalf in terms of all aspects of their health care, their finances, and education, which can be extremely useful to get people in disability counseling offices to collaborate with you. In terms of health care that you are asking about, I don't know that we can assume that everyone, and maybe Justin or Gloria might want to speak to this, I don't know that we can assume that all clinicians are perfectly educated about the BC Mental Health Act, or have years of experience abiding by it in the best spirit. So I think in these moments, anything we have, like a legal document, can just make it more possible to communicate in a way that can see our family member through the crisis.
Though, to get your loved one to agree
Oh,
for
yeah,
that, because of
absolutely.
the paranoia and yeah.
You're right.
it's just-
Oh, well, okay, now you're going to hang on to it, okay. For the first time this afternoon, I've had all sorts of questions today. Now's my chance. So, you know, sort of in summary, it's not my job to summarize the day, but we keep hearing right from the first presentation this morning about this great system where we're going to engage and we're going to be carried through and supported all the way. And yet this panel has repeatedly said something else. These are the families living this. This rings true to me. Perhaps not the First Lady so much. Your experience of building a family support system seems to be a little different than the other gals. But it seems to me that there's everybody I've interfaced with in the system neither understands the Mental Health Act or representation agreements or the issues of privacy. I mean, one time I phoned emergency to ask if my son was still there, just asking if he was still there here at this hospital, and they wouldn't tell me. Now, this is a person with a traumatic brain injury that presents like bipolar disease and a seizure disorder, and they just send him home. And I mean, at that point, I didn't know where he was. And I've had, I think, 7 improper discharges from this hospital in 2015. It's a desperately difficult situation, and trying to coordinate any of the professionals that are involved. Only the epilepsy clinic has, and that very modestly and only with my persistence, has responded to our family concerns. It's very bad, and I would agree with the way you started your presentation. It's a mess. So I love to think that the new coordinated system is going to bang in, and next year we're all going to come back with a better outcome. But my feeling is like it's the problem in emergency where you can't admit people because, oh, there are physical beds but no staff to look after those people. You can have the best of intentions, but unless the next pieces are in order, you're just, in the wind.
These are wonderful comments that you're making, absolutely realistic, and I bet they are echoed from many people in this room. We can hear in theory how the system should work, and that theory is really important because it didn't used to be as good as it is now. So that's the framework. Unless all of us as advocates keep at this, keep speaking truth to power, I'm not sure that we're going to get the best possible implementation of this kind of infrastructure. So we have to keep at it. One thing that you can do is to keep documenting things that aren't right and send off letters to everyone. Ultimately, I believe that the staff all want the best thing for our family members. We have to know that there still are plenty of staff out there who have been trained in family blaming theories. Has anybody ever felt like you were blamed for your family member's illness? So those hands need to be looked at because we need to be more active in providing educational opportunities at every stage of staff development in the programs that are training them in colleges and universities and in professional development, at their conferences, through anything that Vancouver Coastal Health will give us, so that we can speak to them directly, and first of all, they can see that we're not the monsters they might have learned about in the particular graduate courses they took, so that we can build these working alliances because they will make a difference. And I can tell you, as the parent of somebody who had the worst prognosis, having a psychiatrist who has really collaborated with us is the reason that my daughter has been able to be stable for many years. Your points are absolutely important. But
Could I just add one sentence to that, Susan? BC is nirvana compared to Ontario.
Absolutely. So could we thank these panelists? One final thank you. And friend, is there first of all, I want to remind you about the FAC desk with donations, the FAC desk with the box for your conference evaluations, the FAC desk out there for you to put responses to your survey about services that you think would be really useful. And I'll turn this over to Francisca now. And could we take 1 minute to thank and acknowledge Francisca Ling, because this has been months of work.
Thank you very much. It was around December that we started organizing the conference planning committee, and it's been a long 4 months, but it was all worth it. 3 years ago, when I called Sally, I said, my nephew has paranoid schizophrenia, and I said, I need a voice, and I need to advocate for my nephew. So I got involved and volunteered for BCSS, support groups, and chair for the conference. And I hope we are able to provide the information and resources for family members to take home. And I'd like to thank the conference, family conference planning committee, all the members. It's been a lot of work involved, and I'd like to thank every one of them. And also, I'd like to thank the Family Services Involvement Team. They have been really supportive, and without them, we wouldn't be able to have this conference. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for attending, especially I know that some people came from the interior and Sunshine Coast. They were on the 6 a.m. ferry coming here. Thank you very much. And I can't think of anything else. And thank you, Susan. Yeah, and we'll see you all next year. Thank you very much.